are tuned into 1100 WSGI, and this is Lee Marie with the Go Show. I haven't done a Go Show for a few weeks because both Christmas Day and New Year's Day were both on a Wednesday, so I didn't get to do a Go Show. Although yesterday, because I was filling in for U-Turn Laverne on one street over, the guest was frozen out of his car, and so couldn't get into it. And so I actually did a full hour yesterday on one street over, and so I actually covered a bunch of Go Show items because that's what I had here is a bunch of calendar stuff. So if you're looking for stuff to do in Robertson County, you can definitely go and listen to the show from yesterday. And for those of you that don't know how to do that, WSGI1100.com has a website that you can bring up old shows, or you can also go on Facebook or YouTube. And then also we now have phone apps, so you can listen to shows year round. Anytime. So please go ahead and do that. And but today, since it is the first Friday of the month, we have our favorite doctor here who has been healing everybody left and right in Robertson County and also in other counties too. But welcome,
Morning.
Wild Doc. Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Good. How's the family?
Oh, they're great.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you for asking.
And so we've been having people send in comments on email, which that email address is retrolemarie@gmail.com. And also you can put them in the show link as well. So I'm going to go ahead and share this show on my Facebook page in case some of you are having a problem finding it. But we're going to be talking about, whatever the Lord guides us to today. So let's go to the Lord in prayer because we did do a show, but we haven't prayed on this show. So Heavenly Father, thank you so much for today. Thank you for Wild Doc coming in and sharing his knowledge with us. Please take this show where you want it to go. Please help us be our best self this year. We love you and praise you in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So where would you like to start, Wild Doc?
Well, let's start with that condition and question you had from somebody regarding Parsons-Turner syndrome.
All right, and let's have you move a little bit more in this direction.
For the video
for the
perspective, let's see if my cord will reach as far as it can go, if I need that computer or not.
Okay.
But
is that good?
yeah.
Okay, so what was the question?
So I understand that you had somebody reach out and are dealing with Parsons-Turner syndrome. And so we can delve into the nuances and uniqueness of that condition.
Okay.
I've treated, I don't know. It's not been that many. Obviously, Parsons-Turner syndrome is categorized as a rare condition, meaning like 1 in 100,000 people will suffer with that condition. Yet there's actually research that shows that there's a possibility of upwards of 1 in 1,000 people actually deal with that syndrome or situation periodically in their life. Most people, it's a one and done for the vast majority, so that's good news. Most people, upwards of 70%, will improve roughly a year out and regain use of their muscles in their arms. It's a condition noted primarily by extreme severe neuropathic pain, meaning nerve-generated pain that is unrelented and very poorly responds to narcotics, medications. I mean, even like fentanyl. Some heavy-duty pain medications. Like, it's almost like you just have to knock the person out with medications, is what the medical community considers, to be able to relieve their pain, because they got to be asleep not to feel it. But otherwise, if they're awake, they're feeling the pain. Pain medications have very little effect. Anti-inflammatories have very little to no effect. It's very poorly researched, just even brushing up on this topic this morning. You Google it, you search for it, you can understand some of the pathophysiology, some of the causes of it or contributing factors, but it is still one of those conditions by the medical community categorized as idiopathic. And I say categorized by them as idiopathic. So I understand that this individual says that he feels or she feels like it came on after or during a viral illness. And so the three primary factors that that the research is now showing currently that are involved are mechanical So you're looking at mechanical torsion, tension, pressure on the nerves. Ultimately, as a chiropractor, I have seen this condition, and in fact, there are case studies published in the medical literature of individuals responding very, very well, very rapid recovery with chiropractic care. So we can address through chiropractic care potential structural aspects that are ultimately going to lead to susceptibility of that region of the body, those nerve roots or those nerve distributions, to having an increased risk of pathology, inflammation, or the risk of those areas of the body, those nerves, because of structural tension, structural pressure, inflammatory conditions. So you have musculoskeletal conditions that predispose tissues to a higher amount of chronic inflammation. And thus, then when you get hit by a viral illness, and even another cause and contributing factor or trigger, in fact, known to be associated with the onset of Parsons-Turner syndrome is actually vaccination. So again, inflammatory trigger. So vaccinations are an inflammatory trigger. Viral illness, bacterial illness, even parasitic illnesses have been associated with it. So things that are going to trigger an upregulation of the immune system, and thus an upregulation of inflammation, because the body's going to use inflammation to kill off those foreign invaders, those bacteria, viruses, parasites. It's going to use inflammation to try and get rid of it. Now, if you have a susceptibility, a structural susceptibility, again, those structural aspects, and then you add to it in a strong inflammatory trigger via a viral illness or other trigger, then it's going to hit you where you're weakest, is basically what can happen. And then there's also the possibility of a vascular contributing factor. So Parsons-Turner syndrome is when you have neuropathic pain in the first stages, and then it actually goes to atrophy of the nerves and then atrophy of the muscles because they're losing nerve innervation. So that's typically the progress. So what happens is they have severe onset, sudden onset of severe pain, unrelenting, won't resolve with physical therapy and things like that even. And then ultimately decline in the pain over the 6 to 10 week time period typically, and then atrophy of the muscles because they've been denervated, meaning that the nerve roots or the nerve pathway, those axons, nerve fibers, have actually begun to die off. And so, or they're so compromised in their vascular blood flow that they don't get sufficient blood flow, and thus they can't actually trigger or send the signals because they have lack of blood flow and oxygen and energy to be able to transmit signals. So there's a couple of the different ways in which this syndrome can be caused. So ultimately, let's take those vascular issues as possibility of the structural component and the immune inflammatory component. And let's just kind of take those layers, just like peeling the layers off an onion, and say, how can we positively affect all three of those factors if they're going on an individual? Maybe it's two, maybe it's one, maybe it's all three. So again, there's published case studies of individuals just undergoing chiropractic care and nothing else. And this is what I've seen in my clinic for people who've been diagnosed with this condition and coming to me for help and seeing improvements. And all I did in the past, many times, was just adjust them. Now, if this individual who's calling in or sent you this question and they see that the component, and you have to also understand that depending on where they are in this condition's pathology or path, how far along are they, can ultimately dictate what I would recommend to help them heal. So if they're already in the stages where they've had the denervation, the nerves are actually starting to die off, chiropractic can help with cerebral spinal fluid flow through those nerve roots. If there's a mechanical tension or pressure on there, it can also improve blood flow and circulation to those regions. It can also help with feedback to the cerebellum, and thus activation and signaling through those nerve root pathways through the mechanical adjustment stimuli that goes to cerebellum back down into those muscle fibers. So there's ways to help that. And then you Ultimately, again, if you have that denervation, we're going to look at ways in which we can help renervate. So therapies that have been shown to actually improve renervation or the reestablishment of nerve fiber transmission is going to be things like hyperbaric oxygen therapy, red light therapy that's going to increase blood flow circulation, mitochondrial energy, activation, ATP generation, thus giving the body more energy to heal and renervate. So those would be applicable in logical ways in which we're going to help that individual heal.
Okay. Can I ask a question about the
Yeah.
structural aspect? Is that more from a posture thing or like a repetitive stress type of activity, or could it be just both?
Say that again. I apologize.
Oh, for the structural aspect of it, is
Yep.
that usually caused from like a repetitive stress type of situation, overusing that, or is it more like a posture or
It could be all of the above.
okay?
Yeah. That's a susceptibility, not in and of itself considered a sole cause of. But again, but I would say that there's probably quite a few people who, when you listen to people who are kind of just, looking at this condition, trying to figure it out, they really say there's a lot of misdiagnosis of this. You could have disc issues, or they have Parsons-Turner syndrome and they're blaming it on a disc issue, and it's not truly a disc issue because there's an underlying hyper-inflammatory response going on. But typically you're going to find some degree of deterioration in the cervical spine, misalignments that are creating that structural susceptibility. Again, why do they have it one side, not the other? It's not just a inflammatory immune viral illness. It didn't just happen to get into that one area. Those viruses circulate throughout the bloodstream. Those inflammatory cytokines circulate throughout the entirety of the bloodstream. Why does it happen primarily in the upper extremities, very rarely in the lower extremities? You take in those questions and you say, okay, why one side, not the other, if it was something bloodborne? So then you can understand that there's got to be some sort of structural component or vascular component affecting that specific region of the body, creating a increased risk of permeability. You should have the central nervous system, peripheral nervous system has barriers and protective sheaths that ultimately want to keep immune inflammatory compounds and viruses and bacteria from getting into those nerves, and the central nervous system especially. So because of those protective barriers, if you have a weak point in your barrier, let's take the border, for instance, if there's areas of the border where there's no wall, there's permeability, then we have susceptibility. So what created that susceptibility specific to that side of the body, that type of thing, typically I find that we're dealing with some sort of structural issue within the cervical spine and upper thoracic spine.
And in this condition, is it always on the left side? Or
Not necessarily. No, it can be either side.
Either side or both at the same time?
Yeah, it can be both. It's less common for both.
Okay, less common. Is it more common on the left side? I think that's.
I don't think that I've seen within the literature a more common one sided than the other. I have not read that there is.
Because I think that's what they said that it was, and I think that this was the third time it has come back. Like it's been a while, but do you think that those would be a related type of?
So it's way less common that it does come back, at least, as far as tracking, again, it's a condition that is considered a rare disease.
Okay.
And so there's very little information out there. Again, there's speculation that it can be 1 in 1,000. There's current, documents that say that it's likely to be 1 in 100,000 people end up with the condition.
Well, I know when you mentioned parasites, I had to think because I know a lot more people have, parasite issues now with all the dreadful food that were, that have been introduced. So I can imagine that this syndrome might be on the rise.
Well, you could look at it. Well, what you're saying with dreadful food is, the sterilization of our food is ultimately probably would lead to a lower exposure risk of parasites. But parasites are something we're going to be exposed to throughout our environment for many different ways, and the lack of nutrition, quality nutrition, things like that, that lead to immunological decline. So a weakened immune system, a weakened barrier system within the intestinal tract, lungs, sinuses, things like that. So ultimately, the body, when in a less optimal state, is when it can really harbor a parasitic infection for much longer and be persistent and problematic, versus somebody whose body is functioning optimally. Our body was designed with specific immune cells to take care of parasites. Those immune cells, would be eosinophils primarily, that take care of multicellular organisms like parasites. Again, so I see it as, the reality, not necessarily what I see it as. The reality is, even parasites being the cause of something is not necessarily the full truth. The full truth is the fact that you have to be susceptible to a parasite causing a problem, because there's a lot of parasites that can cause problems in people who are susceptible, and then somebody else has the exact same parasite within a stool test. So they have that parasite is inhabiting their body, but it's not causing significant inflammatory responses and tissue damage that's ultimately leading to the condition associated with that parasite. So that's the complexity of that situation. We can't blame parasites alone. We need to be able to live within harmony with them, in essence, because we're not going to escape them. Thank God there are herbs that help those who are susceptible to those parasites causing a problem, in them, to help them recover by inhibiting the parasitics replication, direct killing effect on the parasite thing, or changing the microbiome environment or the gastrointestinal environment, whatever environment may be there. Wormwood, really good for malaria, bloodborne illnesses, parasitic illnesses, as well as gastrointestinal. It's one of the classic herbs for parasites. So,
okay. What about turmeric? Is that a good thing
to a degree, but it wouldn't be as specific. It's more of your herbal anti-inflammatory COX-3 inhibitor than it is an anti-parasitic herb specifically. It's not traditionally used for that purpose. There's other herbs that would be more selective towards anti-parasitic effects.
All right, very good. Wow. All right. I didn't realize that it was, a real rare thing, although not as rare probably as they thought originally.
That's, there's, right now, they don't have any pharmaceuticals for it. There's, speculation that steroids in the early phases, but most of the time people don't find and figure out what it is during the early phases, So there's really, it's just medically speaking, the evidence suggesting, everything from steroids to immunoglobulin therapy, which is basically an immunotherapy to try and help the body fight off a possible infectious agent, triggering the inflammation component. There's now surgeries when they can identify structural aspects of the nerves, that they can basically go in and remove tissue or pressure on those nerves. So, if they can do that, then it's not solely a viral issue that causes it, but there's a structural aspect. If we could avoid surgery utilizing something like chiropractic care, then why not try and utilize that before going under the knife? But luckily in the extremities, if surgery is necessary and they can identify specifically where that denervation is occurring, specifically from a causal standpoint, from compression of either vascular system, so the blood vessels, or the nerves, thank God for a skilled surgeon if they can go in and identify and correct that. But if we can avoid surgery, why not do it? If we can improve vascularization, revascularization, if we can decrease inflammation if it's persisting, if we can help the body renervate and regrow those nerves, or increase action potential of those nerves with various therapies like hyperbaric oxygen therapy or red light therapy in combination with the structural care like chiropractic care. Hey, we've kind of touched on and we have the identity of what's going on and what's causing that condition, or the components that would likely be at play. Well, now how do we help the body accelerate the healing potential and recover? And then ultimately, if we can correct a structural aspect, maybe we take care of the susceptibility, and the individual you're speaking of isn't going in for their fourth or fifth time, or ultimately looking at permanent
Okay.
disability. And permanent disability, again, after 1 year was in around the 30 percentile,
Mm. Mm.
at least from the papers that I've read.
Okay. Now, how would you do it? Like adjustments? Like I did suggest to this person chiropractic care,
Yeah.
and they said I can't. I'm too sore. But I said, well, there's other things that chiropractors can. I mean, do you do adjustments
There's various
then?
different types of techniques. I mean, I know that they're in a lot of pain,
Hmm.
but it's just it comes
So
down
you
to
can do some
yes, you
adjustments
can
on that.
do various different types of adjustments that can be less forceful.
Hmm.
And again, so if that's the case and the individual isn't willing, able, because of their pain level to, allow for mobilization techniques of the spine, we can also affect that nerve component, neurological component, muscle tension component that can affect the structural system, musculoskeletal system, and we can affect the we can help decrease inflammation in the body through vagal nerve stimulus, and using specific upper cervical techniques that are very, very light, or instrumentation that aren't going to cause any significant discomfort in the region of the shoulder and upper thoracics or neck if it's involved or it's in combination along with the Parsons-Turner syndrome.
Okay.
So there's ways around it. So then from there, it's like, okay, if the person were not, then let's look at using things like red light therapy and hyperbarics that are going to increase oxygenation, blood flow circulation, decrease inflammation. That's going to allow for decrease in pain. It's going to help increase nerve renervation, something they use for like diabetics that have ulcers and wounds, looking at amputations. I've talked about that in length in the past. Hyperbarics being capable of facilitating wound healing. And again, denervation is a wound, is a damage to the nerves. And so hyperbarics well established to help in wound and tissue regeneration and healing. And given that extremity nerves can regenerate, then absolutely it's something that would be logical to apply and see where we can get and how much
Excellent.
healing we can get for that individual.
Very good. Well, thank
And that's
you.
not going to hurt them. What I mean? That's not going to cause them more pain, things like that. Them getting in and out of bed is going to cause just as much pain as, those types of therapies.
Gotcha. All right, guys, we are already at 8:30. I don't know how that happened, but this is Wild Doc, also known as Dr. Dale Brown, and he is in Clarksville, but he is slightly closer to us now in Robertson County. Thank goodness, because we have a lot of people that are making that trek over there. But Wild Doc, can you give them your contact information? Because I know some people right now are like, man, this guy sounds brilliant, and he is.
And my phone number there at the office is 931-591-2010. Again, that's 931-591-2010.
All right, and where are you located?
Right off X11, just outside of Clarksville there at the old Apple Hollow property.
And that's such a cool property.
Yeah, it is. It's very cool. Very peaceful.
It's
Pleasant.
just right in the middle of nature now. I mean, you went from one extreme to the other, right? In the middle of a strip mall into the middle of an apple field.
Yes, exactly.
That is great. All right, we're going to go ahead and do a commercial break right now since we are at the half hour point. So let's go ahead and hear from one of our sponsors.
At the UPS Store, we have everything to help small business owners be unstoppable. So if you need printing, we'll be the printing store.
I need help printing brochures. My at-home printer became self-aware.
Of course, the UPS Store can print. Wait, you said self-aware?
Yeah, one day it was saying it was low on ink, and the next it was saying it wanted to rule the world.
Weird. Well, whatever you need, we've got you covered.
The UPS Store can help small business owners be unstoppable with our printing services. The UPS Store. Be unstoppable. The UPS Store locations are independently owned. Product services, pricing, and hours may vary. See Center for details.
Compared to the down home customer. We are back in studio with Wild Doc, also known as Dr. Dale Brown, and his place is called Wild Roots Wellness, and it is in Clarksville. And I've been sending folks to him that have had real puzzling illnesses, and boy, as you can tell, he's just always on top of the research, and he knows. He knows inside and outside of the body so well. I'm just so impressed, and I'm just so thankful that you're able to come on a regular basis and shed light, where we just need it. What else has the Lord put on your heart to talk about?
Well, I mean, discussions lately have been in regards to a lot of people dealing with like pneumonia or seeing kids stricken with pneumonia and things like that. So
Mhm.
I've got into a lot of discussions on some of the herbs that I've
Oh,
really
yeah.
liked to see and utilize. Let me see if I can pull up some of these. Actually, I had some of them up here recently because of that
Well, and there's so much
situation.
going around right now,
Yeah.
and also just remind people again about fevers because I still keep
hmm
seeing on Facebook people freaking out and not realizing, what fevers actually are doing.
Yeah. Man, it's fevers are beneficial. It's just it's so sad. It's so sad. I've tried to hammer this home, and so you'd search out the videos that I have posted on Wild Roots Wellness or the Wild Doc on Instagram. I think it's the Wild Doc TN on Instagram, and then on Facebook. And I got my Wild Doc page censored and taken down by the Biden administration due to what they called misinformation, yet they flagged me for reading research papers or sharing legal documents in regards to CDC funded studies and things like that. But anyways, I digress. But it's the Wild Doc TN on Facebook, Instagram, most of social medias, platforms you'll see there. I did some recent long drawn out, well kind of referenced discussions in regards to whooping cough, fevers, mycoplasma pneumonia, vitamin A supplementation, zinc supplementation, the mechanisms by which the bacteria like mycoplasma pneumonia causes severe lung injury, tissue damage, and then how vitamin A levels within the blood are associated with severity of disease, and then also different herbs like Scutellaria bacalliensis, bacalin, or skullcap, common name, how it helps in protecting the lungs and has antimicrobial effects, antiviral effects, but fevers. All right, so since you asked about fevers, let me see if I can pull up a few things, be able to read directly from some of this research. All right, so here's a nice one right here. Fevers increase immune system defense, study shows. All right, so Roswell Park Cancer Institute, researchers at that institute found that having a fever might be uncomfortable, but this research report and several others are showing that having a fever is part of an effective immune response. This is published in the Journal of Leukocyte Biology. Highlights that I have here in this article, they say that the immune system might be temporarily enhanced functionally. The way in which your immune system functions will be enhanced by the rise in temperature, a quote, fever. It also enhances lymphocyte, immune cell, lymphocytes, CD8 T cell. So there's CD8 toxic T cells. They're toxic to bacteria and viruses or cells that are infected. And those lymphocytes are able to destroy cells that are infected with viruses more efficiently. And they're even able to fight and find cancer cells more efficiently. So, what if God's original design after the fall of man was, since disease would be, man would be stricken with diseases like cancer, God's like, hey, if you get the flu, you get a cough or cold, and you spike a fever each year, it's your yearly cleaning of house that fever enhances cytotoxic T cells that then are more efficient at seeking out cancer and destroying those cancer cells and ridding your body of cancer. There's actually some associated evidence that shows that the possibility that somebody who is never sick, that has a never sick is kind of people believe that sickness is symptoms, that symptoms mean you're sick. So then somebody never gets symptoms, like never gets a fever, oh, they're never sick. But in actuality, they're not walking around here with and I take it back kind of because there are some nuances to these discussions that there are. You have a barrier system. Now, it's very rare that your barrier system, your secretory IgA, your secretory immunoglobulin system is going to be able to prevent every single viral infection from getting into your bloodstream and stimulating an upregulation of the systemic immune response. That's meaning within your physical body. If you had a really strong barrier system, you would get sick less often, but you should have fevers. You should get I believe everyone should have roughly a yearly to bi-yearly fever of some sort, indicating that their body has mounted a proper and healthy immune response, so as to fight off a pathogen that they were exposed to. So that being said, you have to see that somebody who, quote unquote, never has those symptoms, never got a fever in their life, or very rarely did, is actually a potential sign that they have a very weak immune system, that they do not respond to pathogens. So those pathogens can be actually, quote, smoldering within their body and their system, and thus they aren't able to fight it off. So there has been indications in the literature of people with cancer, and when they caught malaria is and even the use of malaria purposely infected people, physicians have done that experimentally and found that stimulating extremely high fever, malaria stimulates a strong immune response. It's a very strong stimulus, and it's a very strong pathogen. And so thank God for things like wormwood that has literally saved more lives than any pharmaceutical out there because of the length of time it's been used to treat malaria in multiple nations throughout the world, even all the way back to BC time period. So again, that's something that God made, so we can thank God for it. But I digress from that kind of thing. But you stimulate a strong immune response. If you can upregulate it, it can actually then transfer over into that increase because of the fever and its effect functionally on your immune system and on your immune cells. They become more functionally capable of seeking out cancer and destroying cancer. So by increasing body temperature, so that's where things like hyperthermia, so increasing the core body temperature. In some alternative clinics, they're using hyperthermia in other nations, other countries where it's allowed. They are using that to actually help the body functionally from that immune system thermal regulation effect, help people combat cancer. So, and usually they have to get the core temperature up to about 105, and that's where malaria has extremely high fevers typically, and so the injection of malaria, and so, I have one paper that actually talks about how, I forget the physician's name, but he said, give me a fever and I'll cure any disease. So he felt so strong about the benefits of fever and the use of things that would hyperstimulate that thermal upregulation and thus the enhancement of the functional capacity of your immune system. Again, elderly with high fevers, the highest fever of close to 105, they had 0 deaths in elderly who were in a hospital with pneumonia. 0 in those who had the highest temperature.
Wow.
The lowest temperature, highest mortality. Highest temperature. And then when they did a study to evaluate significant medication use to suppress a fever, they had such high mortality in the drug treatment group, the suppressing of the fever, they had to stop the study before its completed normal date because it went beyond what was ethically allowed because of the statistical significance of the number of people who died because they treated the fever.
Isn't that interesting?
Yet it's standard practice in healthcare to immediately treat a fever if there's a fever. It's just they ignore. This is going to get me fired up. They just ignore the medical science of the benefits of fever, and it persists within our society that fevers are somehow bad. And I went into depth about how even fevers are not the harmful component. So the temperature and the use of Tylenol and things like febrile seizures were not what was damaging the brain. It would ultimately be the inflammatory component that a fever can actually protect healthy tissue against the inflammation that would ultimately cause the damage to whether it be tissues of the body like the brachial plexus in Parsons-Turner syndrome. So did this individual, when they had a viral illness, full circle back to this individual's case, is he using fever reducers when he gets fever? And thus allowing for a virus or bacteria to penetrate deeper into the tissues because he's lowering the functional capacity of his immune system. So he's creating an additional susceptibility by suppression of a healthy mechanism that God gave us to help fight off an infection. Well, same thing with the seizures or brain damage. It is ultimately the inflammatory component that would ultimately lead to the damage of the brain if that were to occur. But febrile seizures do not lead to brain damage. It's ultimately some other condition underlying that if a viral or a vaccine that triggers a hyperimmune response, an elevated inflammatory response driven by the immune system, that would ultimately be what drives the damage to the brain, not the temperature itself. So suppressing the temperature ultimately actually increases the risks to brain damage.
That is really good information, especially this time of year when there's so much going around, and I still see people on, the socials panicking. About fevers.
People have got to recognize that with healthcare in America being solely focused on pharmaceutical symptomatic treatment, the suppression of symptoms. They have to understand. We have lost touch with the understanding of biology, physiology, immunology, neurology, the way our body was designed to function, heal, fight off infections, repair tissues, all of the above. So we have to think about I'll tell you, I know a lot of people, they always think to themselves, like, well, if you get into philosophy, then you're getting away from science. But think about the simplicity of this. Chiropractic has been, holding a foundation of the philosophy of the 3 T's, and that is thoughts, traumas, and toxins. So thoughts, you're encompassing all those situational emotional stressors in life. Those are all ways to weaken. Chronic stress weakens your immune system. Chronic stress weakens tissues. Chronic stress, and not structural stress. I'm actually talking about hormonal responses to chronic emotional stressors. Emotional stressors can affect brain function because of effects on the blood flow to regions of the brain, suppression of memories, things like that. So you can just go on and on about that. So there's the 1 T there, thoughts. That is emotional stressors. And then you go into the component of traumas. So they're talking in chiropractic philosophy about the physical traumas, physical injuries, whiplash injuries, head injuries, back injuries, things like that. Especially those involving the spine, have a direct physical aspect of causing stress on the central nervous system, thus having a greater component. You injure your big toe, yeah, that stinks. It hurts. It's a physical injury. It can cause you kind of walking stress and things like that, but way less detrimental on your nervous system and your physiology of your entirety of your body's function than if you have a spinal injury. And even minute, what is considered medically, sadly, minor injuries. And, we could say they're minor, thus we can heal and correct them more easily. But when it comes down to if a minor structural stress in the central nervous system is persistent long enough, let's say in simplistic terms, we take the idea that the brain is trying to communicate at 100% through a nerve root that transmits signals to your liver, your lungs, your digestive system. That's how every organ in the body functions. Okay, the brain transmits signals down for your heart to beat, your lungs to breathe, digest food, everything occurs. Your immune system. So like last month we talked about autoimmune diseases. There is a well-established neurological component of this imbalance in transmission of signals out to tissues of the body that run and regulate our immune response. And thus, autoimmune diseases like lupus have a central neurological imbalance component that, when addressed potentially by chiropractic care, when you look at the structural aspect, or the ability of chiropractic care to have a stimulus to the central nervous system in regions like the parasympathetics that then upregulate an anti-inflammatory and immunoregulatory effect. You can help somebody's body regulate these systems, their organ systems, their immune system, and thus help their body more effectively reach homeostasis, a balance that ultimately leads to disease remission, because the body has reached a capacity neurologically to run and regulate and control things and balance things out. So you look at that trauma, so take anything. Chronic postures, looking at a desk all day long, being a nurse. I've got actually multiple nurses have come in to my clinic here recently. Somehow it's spreading like wildfire. It seems that one nurse came in and said, "You're a miracle worker, I've heard." And I go, "No, the good Lord's the miracle worker. I just work with the way God designed the body." So that's kind of my philosophy there. But working with nurses, and you think about their line of work, many times, especially if they're working with patients who have severe disabilities, with Americans being significantly overweight, it's a lot of stress on their back and spine. And a lot of them, they have some of the highest rates of back and neck spinal injury disability rates and being workers' comp rates because of spinal injuries. And so they deal with a lot of stress. And I was actually just walking them through the alignment of their spine. I'm just listing off things that I'm seeing as far as structural and where these nerves go to their body. I was like, you have this area where you have damage goes to your reproductive system and your gastrointestinal system. And she's like, "So wait a minute. You're telling me that my infertility might be related to my lower back?" And I go, "How long you lived?" "My entire life." I'm like, "So nearly your entire life you've been dealing with lower back problems?" "Yeah." And I'm like, "Your brain is trying to transmit signals out to those organs. Just take wherever in the spine." Again, Parsons-Turner syndrome, looking at the cervical spine, where the nerves go through the branches are that go into the brachial plexus and down the arm, related to Parsons-Turner syndrome. So it's just, you take that aspect. It's like the circuit breaker on the wall. That is the chiropractic philosophy. If we get a surge of stress, whether it's emotional thoughts or whether it's toxins like a virus, a bacteria, so biotoxins, mold, malaria, list them all, list all the chemicals out there. Those are chemical stressors. Those are toxins, all right, whether biological or chemical. And then your body has to adapt to it. Why can one person who smokes a pack of cigarettes every single day never get lung cancer, and another person who smokes a pack of cigarettes, never smoked a pack of cigarettes in their entire life, tried to even avoid secondary smoke and winds up with lung cancer? Their ability to deal with the toxins in that region of the body was reduced. And so it's like the circuit breaker. No, when you get this influx of significant stress, even when it's not necessarily physical, if you have a weak circuit breaker, like the 24 individual vertebrae of your spine, if 2 or 3 are out of alignment in a certain region, that region is susceptible to that increased stressor, that surge of electricity from a lightning bolt. That significant stress will blow the circuit wherever the circuit breaker is weakest. That is, in essence, the simplified chiropractic philosophy. We are there as chiropractors to maintain the structure and alignment of the spine so as to maintain, at the best of our human capacity and ability, the ability for the brain to transmit signals through that spinal column without stress, compression, or irritation, or alteration of that normal signal of tone. And that's how you can maintain a higher capacity to deal with stress. If the circuit breakers on the wall are all perfectly functioning, it's like, why does sometimes it surges and nothing happens? One house is fine, the next house exactly the same surge of stress. It just blows everything in the house because it was a 1960s never updated circuit break. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
So
that
it's
makes
kinda that idea.
so much sense. All right, we need to do a sponsor break right here. So let me read this from one of our newest sponsors. It is a new year, and it's time to book an appointment at DK Styles and Tanning. They offer haircuts for everyone, styling, color, perms, waxing, and a spray tan, as well as tanning beds. DK Styles is a big supporter of our military and first responders and offers them haircuts for only $20. DK Styles is conveniently located at 3538 Tom Austin Highway in Springfield, not far from Lowe's. Their hours are Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. to 7 p.m., and Saturdays, 8 a.m. to 3. You can book online at mysalononline.com or call 615-384-8999. Make sure you tell them that Lee Marie sent you. All right, we are here with Wild Doc, and we only have about, oh my goodness, we only have about 12 minutes left. Okay, I better run one more sponsor here because I just got so amazed at what you were saying that I need to do another sponsor.
The Dunn family would like to thank everyone who participated in the tour of Coldstream Christian Camp during Experience Robertson County. Coldstream Christian Camp is now taking reservations. Ministry workers, men's and women's groups, small churches, and families will enjoy rest, retreat, and grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Coldstream Christian Camp, partnering with families and churches since 1980. For more information, visit coldstreamchristiancamp.org or call 615-696-2208. 615-696-2208. And tell them Lee Marie
UPS
sent you.
Store, we have everything to help small.
Nothing can compare to the down-home customer service that you receive from a small-town, family-run drugstore like Southside Drug Company. Stop in and talk with the friendly staff. They've been specializing in hometown customer service for over 100 years. Store hours are Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., and Saturday, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. For more information, visit SouthsideDrugCo.com. Be sure to tell them Lee Marie sent you.
All right, I got all of our sponsors out of the way. Thank you, sponsors, so much for making this show possible. All right, we're here with Wild Doc from Wild Roots Wellness in Clarksville, but that is just up the street, not too far. Actually, I think it's less than a half hour now. I think now that you're you're closer.
About a half hour max.
All right, so what else do you want to end with? We have about 10 minutes left.
I don't know. I mean,
How about this?
yeah.
It's 2025. It's a new year. People need inspiration to be their best self. So
Boy.
whatever little things, like you said, toxins, like right now, I'm reading so much about, like the little plug-in air fresheners, the dryer sheets, all the candles, all this stuff with fragrance. Do you want to speak on any of that? Little things?
I don't know.
No?
I mean,
Okay.
that stuff, it just, you need to, because like inspiration, all that stuff, it's like really you need community. You need people who understand this type of thing that can guide you through the process of, taking care of your body, taking care of your children, whatever it may be. This is why we founded Wild Roots Wellness in Clarksville. I was a chiropractor for so long, advocating for so many different health aspects and trying to give guidance to parents. Then ultimately realizing that, there is a psychological barrier between those out there in helping babies. And my heart goes out to mothers and fathers. Me and my wife have 5 children, love them to death, want the world for them. But when I have seen that 1 in 2 children in America are going to develop a chronic and be diagnosed with a chronic health condition, which includes diabetes and obesity, because obesity affects so many, that's when you get that 1 in 2. So if we take that away, it's anywhere from 1 in 3 and 1 in 5 children will be diagnosed with a chronic health problem. Something needs to change, and it actually starts in the womb. So we hired and brought onto our team a primary care physician, a nurse practitioner, who is her license is overseen by a medical physician, and she provides primary care in Clarksville, Tennessee for those wanting to get out of the pharmaceutical model and raise their children naturally and healthy. And she gives guidance and assistance to mothers and fathers to allow them to understand how they can avoid this sad reality of American healthcare, quote unquote healthcare, but really it's disease care. We are the healthcare clinic in Clarksville, Tennessee. We provide healthcare, thus it's proactive care to help you raise a healthy child. And if your child's dealing with something, we can help give you the guidance and understanding of what are the components that drive that disease process, may have caused your child's situation. We see a ton of infants with colic, with reflux, some dealing with birth injuries. One of my just so happy this baby's responded so well. A mother and father came in with a child that had was not using her right arm, and their primary care physician that they had been seeing was thinking that maybe it was a brachial plexus injury, and they referred them to me, and within one adjustment, like, was grasping things with her right arm before they walked out of the office, was reaching out for things. Like, that is, like, again, I can understand why people would say that I'm a miracle worker. I'm not the miracle worker, God is. But all I was able to do was correct a dysfunction within that little baby's neck that was inhibiting the appropriate signaling from the baby's brain down that arm, not allowing her to use that arm. And she was able to use the arm immediately following. And then from there, you know, we're working with children who have been diagnosed with ADD, ADHD. I have to say, from a legal standpoint, we're not treating that, quote, diagnosis. What we're doing is, when you look at the effects of a stress response on the central nervous system and the effects it has on the brain function, to simply put this into plain language, that if you're in a stress response, let's say you're running from a tiger, you're trying to get out of a burning building, or you have a, God forbid, shooter situation. Let's say any one of those. Running from a tiger is simple. All right. If you're running from a tiger, you're looking for a weapon to fight with or a tree to climb. And if anybody asks you to memorize something, remember the alphabet, spell your name, whatever it may be, do a math problem, a complex math problem, or pay attention, you can't do any of that. You're not going to remember any of it that they're trying to teach you if they're trying to teach you when you're trying to run from a tiger. People get out of a burning building situation and not remember the route they took to get out of the building, because they have a temporary loss of blood flow to certain regions of the brain that are not necessary for immediate survival. So even when it's not a complete loss and suppression, you are going to have some degree, if there's stress on the spine and spinal cord and nerves, that negatively influence when you're in upregulated stress response, sympathetic tone because of spinal misalignments, you're going to have decrease, at least to some degree. Maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 50% decrease in the sufficiency. That means the optimal level of blood flow to certain regions of your brain necessary for cognitive learning, memory, and focus. So it's a natural response if it were not something that was caused by a abnormality or a dysfunction or an injury to the cervical spine, and this typically involves the cervical spine when I'm talking about ADD, ADHD. Most children, we find upper cervical misalignments that we need to correct. And some kids, within a few adjustments, we've taken that stress off their system. Their sympathetic has come down to normal regulatory levels, and they're able to then focus, remember, learn. They change their temperament, their personality, things like that. Now, if it's persisted long enough, there's other rehabilitative strategies, musculoskeletal work we can do. We can use red light laser on their brain in certain regions, frontal lobes, to help activate and increase blood flow and circulation, then to ultimately bring energy. And then we can do rehabilitative strategies to help them improve neuroplasticity and regulation. And so it's complex, but those are things we can do. And so so not about inspiration. That's just not who I am. I'm more about education, information that ultimately motivates people, not just inspires them, but motivates them through an understanding that truth ultimately, hopefully, sets them free to understand there's a way that we can reverse this trajectory, this god-awful trajectory of poor health in America. And I really hope and pray that people listen to this information. If you're dealing with something, allow me to help you figure out your health condition. Bring me whatever problem you have, and I will help you strategize on ways in which, just like this guy with Parsons-Turner syndrome, it's easy to look at the components, the factors that are probably going on, and ways to reverse the damage that was done and ultimately reduce the susceptibility once you understand the mechanisms that drive certain illnesses and conditions. And that's what I do in my clinic. That's what our primary care provider, Mary Beth, does in her clinic. She's really about education, information, proactively helping people avoid the things, and then ultimately having natural ways to help support the body when they come in with an infectious disease or pneumonia and things like that. So,
Well, no,
surround yourself, get yourself a coach or a physician who understands the way the body functions. So yes, it's a shameless plug of I would love to be that person. Mary Beth would be an amazing person for that role
Mhm.
for you and your family.
No,
And that's where you
Mhm.
really change and sustain change that ultimately brings about the change you want, which is better health.
Right. And this is a new year, so guys, come on. You need to take care of yourself and your family. And I know, I still hear about people going to, like, oh, I'm going for another test, going for another test. And I'll tell them, well, go to Wild Duck. Oh, my insurance doesn't cover that. Okay, well, waste half of your life and a whole bunch of gas money going to tests that the insurance covers when you could go. And maybe it's one adjustment and you're, like
Yeah.
but
Could be.
it's just changing people's mindset,
Yeah.
because they still want to just take a bunch of Tylenol when they get a fever. So frustrating.
It's just a lack of understanding, and it's the desire to comfort children. I get it. I understand it. The number, though, of people who, parents that have said, my child has a persistent fever. I was trying to find it, but they show, like, I have a study about thoracic adjustments. And guys, this isn't even chiropractic. So I don't want to be like, hey, I'm biased. I understand that some people may be like, oh, you're pulling up chiropractic. This is actually osteopathic physicians saying that thoracic adjustments or manipulation is the term they used, increased and improved respiratory function. And in studies in hospitals and patients with pneumonia, it significantly lowered mortality rates in those with pneumonia when they were having thoracic and spinal mobilization work done, adjustments, because of the impact it has on the respiratory and immune system.
Wow.
Saved lives.
Such great information, guys. And again, if you missed the show today from 7 to 8, that was Shannon Bumgarner on from Wellspring Ministries. So both Shannon and Wild Doc, they have so much great information for us to just start the new year off right. So I hope you guys will contact both of them. One more time, Wild Doc, your phone number.
931-591-2010. Again, that's 931-591-2010.
Excellent. All right, guys. Wild Doc will be here the first Friday of next month. Keep sending in your hard health questions and give him a call. Write that down. Share this. This is a Christian radio station, and so we don't just come up in all these feeds. You got to send it on Messenger, send it to your friends that you love and care about, because this is life-changing stuff, and
Hope so.
I hope people will call you up. Thank you so much, Wild Doc, for
You're
coming
welcome.
on. I wish you a
Absolutely.
great and
Marie.
wonderful, fruitful 2025, and give your best to your give my best to your wife and your 5 kids now, huh?
Can do.
How old is the youngest one now?
Oh man, he's about a month away from his 1 year.
Oh, my
so, Yeah.
goodness,
So I actually
already.
just under February 2nd was when he was born
Every
last year.
second.
Yep.
Oh,
absolutely.
awesome. Well, congratulations again. All right, y'all, you've been listening to 1100 WSGI. Make it a great day.